it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on. I tell you, it's gone on. Oh, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on. And we won't be silent anymore. Oh, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on. Yes, it's gone on. Yes, it's gone on. Don't you know somebody's hurting my brother, and he's gone on. And we won't be silent anymore. Oh, somebody's taking our health care, and it's gone on. Yes, it's gone on. Don't you know that it's gone on? Yes, somebody's hurting my children. It's gone on. And now be silent anymore.
Did you hear somebody more than the water? And it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Oh, it's gone on far too long.
Oh, yeah, somebody's ignoring our elders, and it's gone on. Oh, and we won't be silent anymore.
Don't you know somebody's telling some lies, y'all, and it's gone on. Well, it's gone on. Oh, it's gone on. Oh, somebody's telling some lies, and it's gone on. Oh, and we won't be silent anymore.
Somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone far too long. Yes, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent. We won't be silent anymore. And we won't be
Now, where I come from, they say, yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
all of
everyone,
for gathering.
for joining us this Thursday. Go ahead, Reverend Barber.
Thank you so much for gathering us tonight. I think, Charlotte, we just got a little crissy-cross there, but you know that happens in the movement. That's no big deal. The real thing that's the problem is the way these people are lying about the Build Back Better plan. And this tonight is a truth-telling session. You know, we all know, and according to EPI, who's on tonight, IPS, we actually should be doing more than $170 billion a year for 10 years. But, you know, we also are deeply bothered by these lies of McConnell and Manchin And the way they try to wrap it in, we're concerned about the future and deficits. Liar, 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 liar. Because if you were concerned about that, you wouldn't have voted for the $2 trillion tax plan of Trump. You wouldn't have supported $21 trillion in war and militarism of our border and other spending since 9/11. You wouldn't be for the infrastructure bill that actually creates more of a deficit. Well, this is entitlements. We don't want to create an entitlement society. What do you think you're making the business, the corporations entitlement? You treat them like people and people like things. You put more money into corporate coffers and the pockets of the wealthy during COVID than the essential workers that saved us in the midst of COVID. You think that you're entitled because you get billions of dollars of corporate donations. You think you're entitled to have tax breaks and to protect the corporations and not the people. It's amazing how one of the things you have to do with these people is the very thing that they say, they're projecting who they are, and they try to project it onto other people. And then what's the other one that we hear? Oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We just don't have the money. But in the amazing, we always have the money. We always have plenty of money when it comes to war. We always have plenty of money when it comes to tax cuts for the wealthy. Well, there's a movement out here along with people like that are with the Institute of Policy Studies and Economic Policy Institute. We're just not going to accept it anymore. We're not accepting the lies. We're not accepting the lies about scarcity, the lies about we don't have the ideas. We know that that is not the truth. And what we're going to do is whenever something is put out is talk about what's in it, what's not in it, and where do we go from here. Cori Bush said something, and I'm going to stop here because she said it as good as anybody can say it. She said, the Build Back Better plan is not everything. It's a step. We've said that. It's a step. It's not when people say this is the most consequential piece of legislation we've seen since the Great Depression, that's really a little sad that we have to say that, because that means we haven't, you mean tell me since the Great Depression we haven't invested $1.7 trillion into the lives of people? We haven't guaranteed people, family leave. We haven't guaranteed pre-K. It's consequential and it's so transformative because of what we haven't done. But she said something the other day. She said, listen, just be straight about it. To be against this step, to be against this move, when you look at all that it does, that you're going to hear about tonight, is to be anti-children, anti-women, anti-black, anti-poor, anti-white, anti-climate, anti-healthcare. And that's exactly the truth. In fact of the matter is, what we see now is what systemic racism looks like. It's not just when a cop shoots an unarmed black people. As gruesome as that is, as ugly as it is, and as racist as it is. It's not just when somebody calls you the N-word. It's when you actually try to stop policies. That when you look at the numbers of who's going to be impacted by those policies, classism and racism is when you block those policies that will lift up Black people, Latino people, Native people, Asian Pacific people. When classism is when you block those kinds of policies that will make the playing field more even and will lift up the poor and low wages. And if you do it intentionally, it sure is racism, classism. And if you do it unintentionally because you haven't done your homework, then it's a form of incompetency. But it still ends up being a form of systemic racism, systemic classism, and elitism, which we must challenge. We must challenge. And so there's a lot going on right now. We've got to keep pushing. You're going to hear tonight about something that's going to go on in West Virginia next Monday with renowned economist Jeffrey Sachs. You're going to hear tonight what's in the bill, what's not in it, what ought to be in it, what should have been in it, what we have to keep fighting for. You're going to hear about next Wednesday, and you're going to hear about June 18, 2022, because, there's one thing that we guarantee these folks we're going to do, and that we are not going to be silent anymore. poor and low-wealth people that make up nearly 30% of the electorate in this country, 40% in battleground states, are going to shift this narrative, and we're going to be a power. And people just say we're going to die trying. No, we're going to live trying. We're going to live trying. That's what we're going to do. We're going to live and live strong and live powerful, and we're going to fight every day for this democracy to move away from being a plutocracy and somebody called a civil oligarchy, and to be a place that's trying to live out the promotion of the general welfare of all people. And we're going to do it rooted in our deepest moral convictions and religious convictions, and we're going to do it in our deepest humanity, and we're going to do it together. So I want to hurry up and get to our brothers and sisters who live this every day and who have said they're not going to be silent anymore. And I want to hurry up and listen to our scholars tonight and our statisticians who will tell you the TRUTH, the truth, TRUTH. That's what we got to have with a big T, truth. Truth. And that's what this is about tonight. And so speaking a little truth today was Jeffrey Sachs. And I want you to hear what he said about Manchin's position, McConnell's position, and these people who come from some of the poorest states. But yet they're fighting. They ought to be the ones champion everything here. But greed is a terrible thing. And the love of money, my God, it is the root of all evil. So I want you to hear them. And then this is Charlotte. When we talked about it last week, and Charlotte said, I got it. So give a hand up for Attorney Charlotte Gupta-Bond. This is her show tonight, our National Policy Director. I'm going to be listening in on another device. But Charlotte, take it from here. And, why we do this, the footnote is so we know how to fight. Remember that. We don't separate the academy from the activism. We don't separate those who have the data from our deliberacy as we stand and we challenge. We will not be loud and wrong. We have to be loud and right, and that's why we must have sessions like this. So we're going to show the video, and then Attorney Charlotte Gupta-Bond will take it over, and we'll move through the program tonight. God bless you all. Love you. Take care.
This is a plan for working people, but to pay for it, let the people with this wealth pay a little bit. This is what is so amazing, is how Senator Manchin's working overtime just round the clock to protect the corporations and the wealthiest people in this country. What is that about, actually? It is just the opposite of what a senator of West Virginia ought to be doing right now. He ought to be championing everything in this legislation and all the stuff that has been cut out because he said you can't afford it. But then he was the one who stopped the way to afford it, which is for rich people to pay something, for heaven's sake. So this is all this is about, is everything's upside down. None of it makes sense until you remember how big money pays for politics in this country. That's the only thing that enables this to make any sense at all, is that money owns our politicians right now. And that is what people are saying, and saying so beautifully. We can't live if this is how this country is going to run, as a plutocracy.
Upside down, but we are going to hear tonight how we are on our path to setting things right. And so I wanted to bring on Reverend Dr. Liz Thew-Harris, our national co-chair, with Reverend Dr. Barber, who'll be co-moderating this call with me tonight. Reverend Liz, would you share some words and also introduce our state leaders who are going to be opening up this next part of our call?
Well, thank you so much, Charlie. Thanks to Reverend Dr. Barber, and thanks especially to folks that are a part of the program this evening. Indeed, we are focusing ourselves on understanding what's in this Build Back Better plan, understanding what we need more to come forward with, and how we're going to kind of build that power and be able to come forward with these bold demands. So, I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, and I'm also someone who gets great inspiration from our biblical stories. And one of my favorite passages in the New Testament is a scene where where Jesus says, if these were silent, then the stones would cry out. We want to bring forward some powerful leaders who have not been silent, who are crying out about the kind of real relief, the kind of real investments in people, and why it makes a difference. Folks that are able to come forward with their stories and the solutions to the problems that are at hand. And so, without wasting any more time, I want to introduce a powerful leader out of the great state of West Virginia, Chris Olsen, who can speak to us about why we need to invest in the people and why this matters and why we're organizing. And so, Chris, thank you so much for the work you're doing and for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. I also want to be really clear when I talk about this. So I want to talk about the relief that the child tax credit has provided me as a single mother. To make an extra $300 has allowed me to meet my son's most basic needs with less stress. It's allowed me to be a better mother because instead of worrying so much about the bills, I can focus on my son. It was such a relief to me to receive my first $300 payment, and it's been a relief every month since July. And to think that I might lose it in December is just wrong. It makes me think, also this relief that it's given me in between, paychecks. It makes me think about all the other things I could be thinking about and creating and doing, what we could all be thinking about and creating and doing if we didn't have to waste so much time and energy worrying about how to just make ends meet to simply survive. For the past 2 months in particular, while my son's father's been between jobs and unable to pay child support just while he transitions, the child tax credit has really allowed me to breathe and live with dignity and not have to borrow money to make ends meet. Child tax credit helps me make my ends meet. It helps me provide the most basic needs of my family with just a little bit less stress. And it's really
recording in progress.
It's really important to me and to my family that we continue the child tax credit. I've left messages for Senator Joe Manchin explaining this to him, and I'm yet to hear back from my senator. I just want to close by saying I'm Kristen Olsen. I'm a mother and I'm a teacher, and I'm the cost of cutting the Build Back Better plan.
Kristen, thank you so much. Thank you for the powerful work and the call and the cry that you just gave us. Thank you also for the invitation for the Poor People's Campaign to be back in West Virginia this coming Monday on the 8th of November for a community forum where we'll be able to hear from the people whose lives are going to be impacted by the Build Back Better plan, by deep investments, bold investments in the lives of the more than 700,000 people who are poor and low income in West Virginia, the 140 million poor and low income people in the country. I want to go next to Karen Ball out of Texas, who can speak to why we need investments in climate change or climate resilience and why we're organizing together. So Karen, thanks for being with us, and please share with us today.
Thank you, Reverend Liz. In thinking of the impact that all of our energy uses have on the environment, I would just like to start out by expressing some gratitude for the first inhabitants in this land in San Antonio, where I come from, and that is the Payaya people. They deeply knew the connection that we have with one another, but also our deep connection with nature. And so I hope that I do justice to the legacy that they witnessed in their daily lives when I talk about the focus that Texas has in terms of staying with energy that is unhealthy for us. It's unhealthy for us individually, and it's unhealthy for our environment. So the first, there's two instances that I want to talk about where environment had an impact on us this previous year. And the first one you probably have already heard of, and that was the deep freeze in February that Texas experienced. It was an ice storm unlike any other and lasted days. And ERCOT, let me get this right, the Energy Reliability Council of Texas was to a near failure and was encouraging local utilities to do roving blackouts to stave off a complete collapse of the system. What happened, I can speak to what happened here in San Antonio in that it was kind of a snowballing effect when we went into this deep freeze. We were already in the midst of a pandemic. So we've got this health concern that we're worried about and is disproportionately affecting persons of low wealth and also persons of color. And then on top of that, we get this freeze. And some places experience complete blackout for about 48 hours. Some places within San Antonio would have rolling opportunity where they could charge their electronics for maybe an hour, and then the rest of the day and the evening, they were in the dark. And there were some individuals that didn't lose power at all. What also snowballed into this was because our public utility was doing these roving turnoffs, it affected the water company, SAWS, our public water system, because then it prevented the ability to pump water to houses. And so we had the snowballing effect of now we've got a loss of water with that. We also had pipes burst, and these pipes then flooded our streets. And we're not equipped for drainage in those streets. So then we have this situation where we can't get people out onto the street because we need to close the streets to do the repairs and everything. And this all has a disproportionate burden on the low income and persons of color. In the regular session, what the governor did was essentially say to ERCOT, we want you to shore up our electricity facilities or capabilities. But he did not say, look at some alternatives. What he wanted us to shore up was make sure we still have access to gas, make sure we still have access to coal, make sure we still have access to nuclear power. Okay, and then the second story that I want to talk about is probably one that many people outside of Texas may not have heard of. And that is there was a corporation or is a corporation called Waste Control Specialist out of Andrews, Texas, that is responsible for the care and disposal of low radium waste. And they are applying for national certification to be able to handle high radioactive waste. Well, most of the radioactive waste now is as safe as it can be and stored near nuclear reactors. There's no immediate danger at the moment where this nuclear energy is stored. But this company, because they're wanting to bring investment to Andrews, Texas, wants to transport spent fuel rods by railway through major cities, San Antonio being one of them. The danger with that is one radioactive container borders and in some cases exceeds the tonnage of what a rail car can take. So it becomes an issue of posing a derailment risk. And then if that were to happen, one of these containers would put out enough plutonium in a 50-mile radius that it would be the same amount of plutonium that was used in the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. And so we see that we need to move away from the energy pattern that we have here in Texas that is heavily dependent on carbon fuels and unstable nuclear energy and move to something that is more regenerative.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. And indeed, we see the connections, right? The connections between the child tax credit and the need to invest in climate resilient infrastructure. We see the connection between paying people a living wage and making sure that we have the health care that everybody needs to be able to handle the kind of pollution, the kind of militarization of our communities that is being talked about. We have one more powerful leader out of the state of Maryland to share with us, some of the again, stories and the faces, the facts, and the realities, the solutions to why we need great investment in the people. And so I introduce Lanellefall out of Maryland. Thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm Lanellefall from Maryland. I'm a proud member of the Poor People's Campaign. I'm speaking out today because I just don't want to be impacted. I want to change the way I'm impacted. I'm a former teacher and an HIM employee. In January of 2020, I had COVID-19 with pneumonia when no announcements were being made in the US. I was extremely ill for months. I lost my job in February of 2020 after 10 years because it was my part-time job because teachers never make enough money. I lost my health insurance and my ability to think properly. My brain was in some type of fog. If I had paid leave, I could have afforded my COBRA health insurance, dental, and vision, and had more job security. Instead, I was extremely impacted. I had to apply for Social Security benefits. It's not enough money. I struggle with my COVID issues, and it was an extreme hardship. And now I have an autoimmune disease because my cells are attacking my body. My insurance denied treatment for non-invasive care that my doctor recommended. So instead, I received the most extreme treatment. My skin burns, swells, blisters, and bleeds. This treatment can also cause cancer. My prescription costs $100 every 3 weeks. I want to change the way I'm impacted with decent health care, lower prescriptions, and child care relief. I call it child care relief because I've had my grandchildren and other parents have children that are out of school because of COVID pods that are going on in these classrooms all around America. And when these classrooms close, parents have to manage the Zoom classes at home. You cannot leave these children, kindergartners in first grade, alone on a computer. The governor in my state acts like COVID doesn't exist. All of our schools are being affected here with COVID. The state has resources and money, but not for people of color, low income, and the poor here in Maryland. The unfortunate disparity is at a disproportionate level. Our elected officials have ignored us and are completely out of touch with our reality. The Build Back Better bill needs paid leave, better care delivery that promotes health and wellness, a reduction in prescriptions costs, and child care relief because children are being left sick and home alone. I want to change the way I'm impacted We, the people, need relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Linnell. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Chris. In the Poor People's Campaign, and when we think about how change happens, we know that change happens when we begin to hear these untold stories, and all of these stories and experiences, they ground the policy work of the Poor People's Campaign, from the moral agenda, the moral budget. Everything that we understand that we need right now is coming out of these experiences and insights from our campaign, from our state leaders across the country. So I wanted to bring on our policy partners from very early days in this campaign, from the Institute of Policy Studies and the Economic Policy Institute. I'm really pleased tonight that we have Rebecca Entralgo, who is with the Institute for Policy Studies and works on the inequality.org project and is an expert in the care economy. We also have Heidi Shearholtz, the president of the Economic Policy Institute, who's a labor market economist and was a chief economist to the Secretary of Labor from 2014 to 2017. And Sarah Anderson, the director of the Global Economy Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you all for being part of this conversation tonight on the Build Back Better agenda, what's in it, and what more we need in the days ahead.
So I want to start us off by posing a question to everybody that's here, and I want to start, Rebecca, with you, but we'd like folks to answer this question right on down the line, and it's what will we see? What will this nation see when this Build Back Better plan is passed and then enacted? Rebecca, if you might start us off.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, first of all, for the Poor People's Campaign for hosting this incredibly important event, and also for the state leaders for sharing the really impactful narratives. I mean, your narratives are the reason why a lot of these policies are still really included in this massive piece of legislation. So I have a very short slideshow that I'm going to start sharing my screen now with, and we can get started and really start talking about some of the big policy proposals that are really going to impact families with children, especially poor and low wealth families with children, as well as the elderly and those people living with disabilities. I think for all that really didn't make it into this plan, I think this is the really, really core part of the plan. It's going to have an impact on a lot of families. So starting with the child tax credit, like you heard from Chris, this is having a really big impact on families across the country. And in the Build Back Better program, this is going to be extended for 1 year. So that's the enhanced $3,000 to $3,600 child tax credit per child. And I think what's really important about this also is that it's fully refundable, which is basically just policy talk for that. Even if, the family doesn't make enough money to pay taxes, they still are going to be able to access this benefit. And that's 27 million additional children who are going to have access to this child tax credit that were previously left out, and really have a big impact on child poverty and reduce that by about 40%. The Build Back Better plan also creates a universal pre-K program for 6 million 3- and 4-year-olds. And not only is it going to have a really big impact on families who, as you just heard from Linnell, are really struggling on the aspect of childcare, but it's also going to have an impact on workers as well. One of the reasons why childcare is so expensive in the United States is because there's a shortage of workers, and not just because people don't want to work, it's just they can't afford to for poverty wages. The average childcare worker earns about $13 an hour. And under the Build Back Better plan, these wages would be increased to match that of elementary school teachers, which is about $34 an hour. So a really big impact for them on that front as well. For children who are under the age of the preschool age, the Build Back Better program has some childcare subsidies that will ensure the majority of families are not paying any more than 7% of their income to go towards childcare. And if their household makes less than $72,000, that is free for those families under this plan. And then, referring to, again, what Linnell was talking about, paid leave. This has been an issue, and it's still going to be an issue going forward to make sure that we can fight to have this stay in the final bill. But right now, we're looking at 4 weeks paid leave for caregiving of a loved one. And I think it's really important that the definition of a loved one extends beyond the traditional definition of family. You can care for someone who, maybe falls out that traditional definition of family, as well as, of course, for yourself for a personal illness. And that's also, really important since we're one of 6 countries in the entire world that currently does not offer a paid leave program. And then quickly going over to another group that's going to be really, going to really benefit from this plan are our seniors and those living with disabilities. We have about $150 billion, which unfortunately is a large scale down from the initial $400 billion proposed investment. But the goal here is to increase Medicaid funding that will really help eliminate those long waiting lists for the elderly, veterans, and those living in disability to receive care at home. And then similar to the preschool plan, it also raises wages for 2.4 million home care workers, majority of whom are women and people of color who, again, are earning very low poverty wages for the backbreaking and very essential work that they do. And then finally, I'll just touch on hearing aids. There's a big fight over including, benefits for hearing, dental, and vision. Right now, currently, the bill only covers hearing. Medicare will cover hearing benefits, but even so, 30% of seniors who need a hearing aid only actually get one. So this will sort of open up that opportunity for those seniors as well. So that's a good rundown of sort of all of the core aspects of the Build Back Better program, where we can sort of talk about what really needs to be done to go forward from here. But I'll end there and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Well, thank you so much. It's so helpful to see those numbers, to put faces on the facts, and to realize what a huge investment is needed and is on the way. I want to move next to Heidi Scherholtz. If you could speak about what we're going to see, especially when it comes to questions of worker protections, jobs, immigration, climate, so many of the other aspects of this important bill.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And thank you. I want to thank you so much for this critical event and for all of the work of the Poor People's Campaign and the state leaders here. It's just an honor to be a part of this. And it is totally true. Rebecca talked about some of the really top lines, and they are crucial investments in the Build Back Better Act. But there's a lot of other stuff there that's worth talking about. And so I do want to talk about the worker protections that are in this bill. They're not a ton, but it establishes penalties for employers that violate workers' rights to join a union and to collectively bargain. So, for example, if an employer intimidates, retaliates against, or fires a worker for union activities, they will now actually have to pay substantial penalties for doing that, and that will matter. It is against the law to intimidate workers, retaliate against them, or fire them for union organizing. Those are protected activities under the law, but employers now, under current law, do them all the time. They do those kinds of activities constantly because one key reason is because the penalties are so incredibly weak. There is essentially no financial incentive for companies to comply with those laws. So employers just count the minuscule costs of those penalties as the cost of doing business, and then they just flagrantly violate the law. So stronger penalties will actually make a difference. And I think this really gets at the heart of a myth that we see all the time about the decline of unions in recent decades. Many commentators just sort of tout this claim that the decline of unionization is because people don't want to be in unions. And it is just not true. The decline of unionization is a result of absolutely relentless attacks on unions by employers. And so the monetary penalties that are in the BBBA will actually make a difference. They're not going to completely solve the problem, but they'll matter. And then along those same lines, the legislation also increases penalties for employers who commit minimum wage violations, who commit health and safety violations. Those things have historically also had very weak penalties. So those are really important measures. Another thing I want to say about the BBBA is that it will actually create jobs. And the BBBA, sorry, it's hard to say. The BBBA is not a jobs bill. its primary purpose is to sort of move us towards the economy we want. But at the same time, it actually will create jobs. And so by our estimates, using very standard methodology, it will create 3.5 million jobs per year for the first 5 years it's enacted. And that's huge. And one of the reasons it really matters is because with the spread of the Delta variant this summer, and then the investments from the earlier relief and recovery plans already running out, the investments that we're seeing here are just absolutely crucial to helping ensure that we do have this strong and stable recovery in coming years. And I just also want to say that one of the ways it creates jobs is by helping ensure that clean energy technology, like wind turbine blades, solar panels, electric cars, that those things will be built in the US with US materials, creating a huge number of jobs. So that's one way this plays out. And then the final point I want to make on the sort of lesser known provisions of the BBBA is its provisions on immigration. So like many things, the provisions on immigration are far from everything that we need, but it is a step. It takes an important step. So what the legislation does is provide a temporary status, which is known, I find strangely, as parole, for roughly 2/3 of the unauthorized immigrant population. So everyone who arrived before 2011 is eligible for this status. It is not a path to citizenship, but that new status will protect those people who qualify from deportation, and it will allow them to work lawfully. So it's sort of very much like DACA in that sense. So it is just incredibly important. So that's a key thing. And the BBBA also includes provisions to help clear out our massive green card backlogs. And that will provide certainty and permanence to millions of immigrants, and it will help unify families. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Well, thank you so much. It's so helpful to be, diving more deeply into seeing what is there, what still needs to be added to. I'm going to have us keep on going. I want to turn to Shally, back to you. If you could talk a little bit about healthcare, especially the expansion of Medicaid, and how that's playing out in this BBBA.
Sure, I can just say a little bit on this, and it's important, especially coming through this pandemic and over the past year, where another 10 million people enrolled in Medicaid, where they could, but there were obviously, there are also millions of people in 12 states, 8 of which were in the South, that had not expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And there are provisions in the Build Back Better agenda that will close that coverage gap, both by providing health insurance to people who lived in those states that didn't expand Medicaid. So that covers another 2 million people, a little bit over 2 million people. And in states that did expand Medicaid, making sure that people who had lower incomes that were in the, under the Affordable Care Act in the marketplace are now eligible to access Medicaid, because they fell into this gap basically where even though they, could enroll in the marketplace, they couldn't actually afford, to access the healthcare that they had. And so, this is going to, for the non-expansion states, the 2.2 million people, 60% of these 2.2 million people who will now have access to healthcare are people of color. This includes over 550,000 essential frontline workers who have not had access to healthcare over the past several months. Makes it possible to enroll in a healthcare plan regardless of where you live. And for those who weren't able to access the healthcare that they were eligible for, now they'll be able to access Medicaid in those expansion states. So these are significant gains, and they're important to think to.
Great. Well, just to even keep on filling out this picture more, we're hearing a lot of conversation in this Build Back Better agenda around this question of taxation. So I want to go to you, Sarah Anderson, if you could speak a little bit to what's there, and how do we make sense of it all?
Thank you, Reverend Liz. It is wonderful to be here with you all in what I hope will be the final stretch of the Build Back Better negotiations. I know you've all been working so hard, and you could probably use a little break before we gear up for the next round. But how are we going to pay for all these public investments? The main point I want to make here is that the Build Back Better Act will be fully paid for by raising taxes on the very wealthy and large, very profitable corporations. And it will not add a dime to the deficit. So let me give you a couple of examples of how they're going to do this. One innovative new tax will be what we're calling the millionaire surtax. It will target people who are making more than $10 million a year, which is a very small group of people. It's just 22,000 people in America are at that very high income level, and they will be paying more taxes on their paycheck income, their salaries, and also the income they get from capital gains or their investment earnings. So that's a big one. On corporations, one of the innovative things is they are setting 15% minimum tax rate on big corporations' domestic and foreign earnings. And one thing that's super cool about it is it's part of a global agreement where 136 other governments have also agreed to set a 15% minimum tax rate on corporations. So this should really crack down on all these big profitable companies that have been paying next to nothing or even, actually nothing in federal taxes because they've been taking advantage of tax havens or other loopholes and pitting governments against each other, trying to lower their tax bills and not pay their fair share. And then finally, I want to mention one other thing that isn't a tax measure, but it's a way to keep the cost down. And that has come together just in the past few days and has to do with new ways to control prescription drug costs. And this is really a credit to the Poor People's Campaign and others that have been pushing so hard on this. So what it looks like now is they're going to, for the first time, give Medicare the power to negotiate prices for a set list of drugs. They're going to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Right now, we have a lot of diabetics in our country that are skipping doses because they can't afford it. So that's huge. They're going to cap out-of-pocket costs for Medicare at $2,000 a year. And they're going to penalize pharmaceutical companies that raise their prices above the rate of inflation. And so just to summarize, not everything I wanted is in this bill. We've got a lot more work to do, but it's really a step forward in fair taxation by raising taxes on the ultra-rich, big corporations, and reducing the price gouging of the big pharmaceutical companies.
This is just so helpful. Just want to amen and appreciate the amazing information that folks are putting out. I know that everyone, the thousands of people that have joined us this evening, are just nodding their heads and appreciating the learning that we're doing here. I want to do a follow-up question to each person as well. What we're very aware of is that the conditions that people are facing are very dire. That the economy is not creating the kinds of jobs, offering the incomes that people need. We know about, massive evictions that are on the horizon. We know homelessness and so much. And also we've already heard some hints of places where this agenda doesn't go quite as far as we need it to go. And we know that we in the Poor People's Campaign have been talking about this as a first step. A really important, a really vital one. So I want to turn back to you, Heidi, first, and see what given these conditions, given the reality of the Build Back Better agenda, what do we need, and what especially when it comes to workers' rights and protections, what more are we in need of, and why does this matter?
That's a really good question. It's super important. And I like the way you talked about like this is a first step. This legislation doesn't do it all. It's incredibly important. It is a great piece of legislation. and there is still so much work to do. So when you're talking about workers' rights and protections, I mean, one of the things we're hearing right now a ton about is labor shortages and employers having to raise wages to attract workers. And it's just, there's this really breathless conversation going on about that. And it is actually true that that is happening in some sectors, that we're seeing a shortage of workers. We're seeing employers having to raise wages to attract workers. That's, I am like those wage gains are actually really, really important and good things to be happening. But one thing, they're not enough. So like we've heard a ton about employers in restaurants having to raise wages to attract workers. But if you look at the actual wages in the leisure and hospitality sector, so that's a sector that has restaurants and also has hotels. There's been a huge increase in wages over the course of 2021 in that sector. But even with those wage increases, the weekly earnings of non-supervisory workers in leisure and hospitality translates into annual earnings of less than $22,000 a year. Like, even with those huge increases that we've been hearing so much about, they're not enough. So we need to do things like increase the minimum wage. Like, we need to increase the minimum wage nationally to $15 an hour. And then states and localities where there's higher cost of living need to go substantially higher than that. But we absolutely need this federal floor. And then I also mentioned that there's some provisions in the BBBA that will increase unionization, and that's true. Those are great. But in order to really halt and reverse the trends of rising inequality, wage stagnation for most workers for most of the time, a rising black-white wage gap, in order to reverse the portion of those things that is due to the decline of unionization, we need a much more comprehensive set of reforms to boost unionization. So we need a fundamental overhaul of our labor laws in order to truly reinstate the right of workers to join a union, to truly close that gap I was talking about between the share of workers who want to be in a union and the share of workers who actually are in a union. So that's another key thing that we need to move to after the sort of ink dries on the BBBA.
I love this image, right? We see the ink drying, and we have to keep on pushing for more and more and more, because that's it's the morally right thing to do, and it's economically sound. And so, Rebecca, I want to go back to you. You talked about the power of these child tax credits and the people that it's impacting. Can you speak to what more needs to happen there, and other kinds of programs to kind of lift from the bottom so everybody can rise?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to just remember that we could have afforded the entire, 3.5 trillion or however much more we needed to fully fund. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind when thinking about, what's possible, because we can do everything that we want to do, and we should do everything that we want to do. But with regard to the child tax credit, as I mentioned before, the enhanced version expires after a year, and we really want to make sure that's going to be a very big fight. I can imagine, once this passes, hopefully that we can continue to fight to make that permanent, because it is such a relief to so many families. But also so many of these families, or so many of these policies, because they have been, sort of pared down in various ways, are really a down payment or a sort of step in the door. And so we really need to work to make sure that these policies and programs can be made permanent and available to as many people as possible. There are some, means testy sort of work required me type languages in some of the childcare provisions. And we really want to make sure that, everyone can have access to those amazing benefits, because these are already very popular policies, and they'll be even more popular when everyone can access them. And I think that's really important to remember, especially, I do a lot of work on the care economy, and there are a lot of compromises that were made in that space. We're talking about an initial $400 billion investment pared down to $150 billion investment. And I think, talking about how important that is, I think people will be surprised to learn that when we're talking about the fastest growing job industries, we're not talking about tech, we're not talking about engineering, we're talking about care. The baby boomer population is going to be aging, and they're going to be needing people to take care of them. And right now, those jobs are very, like I mentioned before, low paid. So to meet that moment, we're going to be needing to create good, high-paying union jobs to meet that moment of care. And I think that's something that the initial investment of $400 billion that was taken directly from care advocates who are working with the White House to really get that in there. So I think that's going to be a big focus going forward. But yeah, just to reiterate, I think, we could have afforded the initial program, and we should keep fighting to make sure that those who are compromised in this policy compromise can be placed at the center of the next policies going forward.
That's so helpful. Both this idea that we need to invest more and we can afford it, and then also that we cannot allow for that kind of means testing and that work requirements being added to these social programs, and going back to these trickle-down neoliberal policies that have really only hurt everybody, including and especially the poorest in our society. So when we talk about means testing, when we talk about work requirements, it makes me think back to you, Sarah, a little bit more about what else do we need to see around wealth taxation, around debt relief, around the other side of the economy, and those that are booming while the rest of us are really not doing so good.
Yes. Well, one disappointment of the House version of the Build Back Better Act is that it doesn't do enough to raise taxes on billionaires. And this is disappointing because U.S. billionaires have seen their fortunes expand by $2.1 trillion during the pandemic. And what are they doing with that money? They're blowing it on their own space adventures instead of helping people in the planet at a time of severe crisis. So clearly they could be contributing a lot more to meeting these urgent needs. And we came pretty close with the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, the top tax guy on the Senate side, and President Biden supporting a tax on billionaire wealth gains. And but the House version doesn't have it in it. So it's unlikely at this point to see it making it into the final legislation. So I see that as something to really, build on that momentum for the next round. I could list a whole bunch of other of my favorite revenue raising ideas, but I also want to point out that I think something really significant that did happen is that even though we could have raised so much more by taxing the wealthy in this deal, the deal still represents a rejection of the failed trickle-down theory. That let those guys at the top do whatever because their wealth will trickle down and somehow benefit the rest of us. This is a departure from that. We are going to raise taxes on the ultra-rich in this deal, not as much as I would like to see, but it'll lay the foundation for future victories. And just, a word on the debt situation. Student debt cancellation was something a lot of people had hopes might be in this, but I think there's still hope that the Biden administration could do some things through executive action to relieve that burden, and personal debts in general are something that are going to need to be part of those next steps.
Amazing. Just so appreciative of the conversation we're having here, and both the celebration of the reason why we're pushing for this Build Back Better agenda, and why we're going to continue to push and fight for that full third reconstruction, fully addressing poverty and low wages from the bottom up. I have one more set of questions to folks that are gathered here, because we've already kind of hinted at it. We've been hearing all of these lies, and that's what they are, is lies, that we just can't afford this, that this is just unfeasible. And so I want to start again back with you, Heidi, if you could speak to we know we need this, but is it possible? Is it possible politically? Is it possible economically? What do we know about the connection between policy and economics?
I'm an economist, so I'll totally speak from the economic side. The economics of this are totally straightforward. It is good for the economy, this package. So one thing is, when you get money in the hands of poor people, of middle class people, you are getting money in the hands of people who are very likely to have no choice but to spend it on necessities. And that's actually really great for the economy, because when people spend money, that increases demand for goods and services. Who generates goods and services? Workers. So it increases jobs, it can increase wages. So that's a really crucial piece of why this is good economics. And then when you are making the specific kinds of investments that are in this piece of legislation, childcare, housing, pre-K, healthcare, climate, and on and on and on, those things will make us more productive in the long run. Like, you get kids good pre-K, that sets them up for success, which will make them more productive. When high quality childcare is provided, which means chaos in the lives of parents is massively reduced, that makes them more productive, and on and on and on. And I don't want to laud productivity as the ultimate measure for any piece of legislation. I don't. But in this case, it actually is 100% true that these investments will set us up to be more productive, more competitive as a country. They are not only the right thing to do, they aren't just the moral thing to do, they are excellent economics.
It's just so amazing to hear. I was thinking when you were speaking right now about, the cost of inequality, the cost of child poverty, the cost, and it's an economic cost. It's for sure a moral cost. We don't want kids going to ailing schools without pre-K and the investments, but also economically, we know that when we invest in programs that lift from the bottom, as you're saying, and as we've heard throughout this evening, everybody can rise. I'm going to move to you, Sarah, about this question of budgets and about this question of where the resources exist, and do the resources exist? Again, we might need all of this, but can we do it, and how can we do it?
Absolutely. Well, one thing we haven't talked about yet tonight is all the money that we spend on the Pentagon budget. There's so much talk about the cost of the Build Back Better Act. It's about a quarter of the cost of what we spend every year on the military. And I think I want to end by just underscoring a core Poor People's Campaign message, I think, which is that when you hear people talking about how the richest country in the world can't afford to make these vital public investments, what you should throw right back at them is, how can we afford not to make these investments? If we don't do the spending now on climate change, we're going to pay so much more later. If we don't make the investments now in ending child poverty, we're going to pay so much later. And so I think just flipping it around, we are a country of abundance. We can easily afford to make the investments that are in this bill and then build on it to really solve the problems that we're dealing with once and for all.
Thank you for that reminder. I mean, both about how whenever the military needs more resources, in fact, right now we're giving more money to the Pentagon than they even requested, right? The money is always there. But when we, as poor and low income people, as folks that are coming forward saying, invest in our kids, invest in our communities, then we are always told we have to choose and we have to make compromises. And those compromises are always to the detriment of the fullness of life for everybody, including and starting with poor people and low-income people. So I want to speak a little bit about that because, Shally, you just authored this powerful study, a study that talks about how poor and low-income people hold in their hands the power to transform the political landscape of the country. And that in the 2020 election, because there were candidates talking about raising the minimum wage, talking about expanding healthcare addressing systemic racism, expanding voting rights. You saw really high turnout amongst poor and low income people, and so in the context of we know we need to do this, and how are we going to do it? Can you speak to that? Can you speak to what it's going to take and how we can get this done?
Well, I think, one of the things we hear all the time is about how, one of the other myths we hear is about how poor and low income people just aren't interested in politics, they aren't interested in elections, they don't turn out. And what we found when we looked back in 2020 was that actually poor and low income voters accounted for around 1/3 of the voting electorate, and even higher numbers in battleground states. And so, these are poor and low income white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native voters who are turning out in the numbers in an election, where issues that they are most concerned about, health and economic well-being, are part of the political narrative, are on the agenda. And in terms of, is this possible politically? I think we're looking at the population, 140 million people, over 50 million voters who can move this country in that direction if there is an agenda that speaks to these issues. 2020 was just a glimpse of what could be possible if and when these issues are centered in not only the political narrative, but, as Heidi was saying, in how we understand our economy to function better so it works for everybody. And, when we talk about, we didn't have a chance to talk about, the concerns around housing or public education or public health, but, alongside, raising taxes on those who can afford them, we should also be talking about debt relief. We should be talking about how do we, push back against this rising tide of voter suppression to encourage the broadest possible participation of poor and low income people, of voters of every color, ethnicity, age, region of the country, to express their political priorities in our elections, and to ensure that our democracy can be a place where these priorities are taken up in meaningful ways. And so I think this call for everything we've been talking about, here for this evening, is not only for the poor. It is for the entire company to go in. And, in the campaign, we talk about this as a third reconstruction, to rebuild this country around the needs and concerns of those who have been most impacted by the failures. And again, the Build Back Better agenda is a step towards this direction. We know that the political power exists to compel even greater action, even more steps forward, to organize and to build the power of these voters, of this broader low-income electorate, of the 140 million, and everybody who's really impacted by the inequalities that we're living in, and take the momentum that we will see, when this Build Back Better agenda and the infrastructure bill are passed and enacted, and we can begin to build back from the bottom up. So that's, I think, what we're looking for in the days ahead.
Well, thank you all so much. This has just been an amazing hour of learning, of seeing how these are very real issues that are impacting our communities right now as we speak, and to be able to kind of tease out and parse out so we understand better both what's in that bill and what we're going to keep on pushing forward in the days to come. Right now, I want to do a little bit of a call to action, because right now the future of this Build Back agenda is in question, and it's in question because of a small number, a minority of senators who are not listening to the will of the people right now. We know that voting rights are wildly popular, and the expansion and protection of them are something that the people are asking for, demanding, and yet we have not seen the passage of protections and expansion of voting rights. We know that investments like the child tax credit, like climate resilient jobs and infrastructure, like the care economy, is exactly what people are needing and are demanding. And so I want to just remind folks that the Poor People's Campaign is continuing to keep up the pressure. We will, as we said before, be in West Virginia on Monday, and folks can tune in and turn out to be a part of that on Monday at 2 p.m. In Charleston, West Virginia. Follow the Poor People's Campaign for more information. On Wednesday, our coordinating committees in states all over the country will be having actions and press conferences calling out on their senators while they're at home for a work week at home, that we need this as a first step. And we're going to keep on pushing. And then the week of November 15th, which is when we've heard some more votes in the Senate will be taking place around this Build Back Better agenda. We know that the votes in the House are taking place sooner, but in the week of the 15th, we're calling on folks to join us in DC as we continue to put up the pressure, raise the heat on our politicians who were put in place to serve the will of the people, but who, as my co-chair, Reverend Dr. William Barber, often says, often will treat people as things and corporations as people. And so we know that is not right, that is not just, and we're going to keep on organizing and building power. And all of this connects to this massive call from the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, for us to be in Washington, D.C. in June 18th, for a mass poor people and low-wage workers assembly, a moral march on Washington. That is not a day, it's a declaration of the kind of power that poor and low-income people and people of faith and conscience across this country are building to have the political will. We heard it this evening. We have the resources. They are at hand. They are at our disposal, but we have to be able to build the kind of compelling power to be able to enact those policies and so much more, to actually be able to lift the load of poverty, to address systemic racism, to save the earth and everything living in on it, and to change this war economy, this militarization of our communities into a place of peace and truth and love and justice. And we have to keep on pushing against these narratives that blame poor people and immigrants and queer people and women for all of society's problems, these narratives that pit us against each other and that feed us this lie that this is as good as it gets, that we can't do anything better, that we're living in a world and a society of scarcity, when we actually are living in a place of abundance, as we have heard from these powerful policymakers, these powerful economists, these powerful grassroots leaders that are coming together. And so I want to thank everyone for being with us this evening. Make sure that you show your appreciation for these amazing leaders that have been with the Poor People's Campaign from the very beginning, making sure that, as Dr. Barber said this evening, we're not just cursing the darkness, but we're shining a light on what's possible and what's necessary for us to be able to really lift from the bottom so everybody can rise. And so we in the Poor People's Campaign always close out our sessions with a chant where we say we're going to move forward together and not one step back. And so from wherever you are joining us this evening, please join us as we say forward together, not one step back. Forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
Thank you all so much.